Hi, and welcome to my unboxing of the She Wolfe Tarot. I'm very excited. I saw this deck originally before it came out. I think I was Googling tarot decks and the Serpent Fire deck came up, and then I noticed on her website that she was releasing another deck. It hadn't been actually published at that point in time. So then I was waiting, but then I went through a phase where I was just buying decks really compulsively, and so I decided to pump the brakes on my deck buying, but I have made another exception as this one has stayed on my mind. I have continued to want it for I think over a year now, so I decided to go ahead and get myself a copy. The box is lovely. It's actually quite large, as you can see, and it feels very sturdy, and it slides open much easier than the Miracle Tarot. And the first thing in the box is a very lovely little book here. I haven't taken a look at anything in the box yet, so I'm really excited to look through this book. It's about 200 pages, and so it seems like there's a ton of cool info in here. I'm really excited to check it out and see what she has to say about the deck. Inside the box, there's a really lovely little writing, and I love when decks have little secret features inside. So the deck itself is actually quite a good size. I wasn't sure if the box was just larger or if the deck was also larger as well. I'm actually a really big fan of larger tarot decks, and the sides are sort of rose gold edged. They're very beautiful. It's definitely very lovely. There's no borders on the deck, so you just get the full impact of the image when you look at the card. This version of the Fool is very interesting to me. Most versions that I've seen only have one figure in them, or sometimes like the Fool themselves and maybe like a small animal. In here there's this sort of wolf-like creature, there's another wolf, and there's a woman up at the top, and so I find that to be really interesting. I'm curious to read more about her interpretation of this card. At first glance, I really like it. I like the colors. I feel like it has a really different vibe. I think sometimes the Fool tends to be really happy-go-lucky, and it's kind of that ignorance is bliss feeling, but I think oftentimes when we're starting out at the beginning of the journey, we may actually feel a bit more unsettled, and there's something a little more edgy about the energy of this card that I really like, that I think captures the beginning of a journey in a way that a lot of the Fool cards kind of gloss over. The next card in the deck is I'm going to say Magus, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but it's the equivalent of the Magician. And I love this card. So the Magician often has a very masculine feel to it, and I love that the imagery on the card is definitely very feminine. You know, there's sort of a resemblance to the work of Georgia O'Keeffe. I'm obviously obsessed with Georgia O'Keeffe. I see her everywhere, but here we have, you know, this very flowery kind of symmetrical image, very feminine in nature, very beautiful, and I love the planets. I love the colors. I just feel like overall the aesthetic of this deck is very fresh and exciting. This is the High Priestess. I believe this is actually a picture of the deck creator herself. It's a pretty cool image. Definitely harkens back to the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith High Priestess with the black and white pillars, with the woman, the female figure in between the pillars, and sort of the mystery behind. And I like how actually the mystery is represented by this giant moon. I think that's a very wonderful way to put that. I also enjoy that there are, you can see kind of like, I think they're like scorpions at the bottom here, along with some peacock feathers, and that detail to me is interesting. I mean, so in the moon card in the Rider-Waite-Smith, there's sort of these crustaceans that sort of symbolize the unconscious, so I'm kind of curious about the symbolism there. I really enjoy it. So instead of having the Emperor and the Empress, we have the Divine Masculine and the Divine Feminine. I like that idea a lot because I end up having to explain to people when I'm doing readings, like, you know, that this character that has this masculine name, it's representing, you know, an archetype, it's representing an energy. It doesn't literally necessarily correlate to physical maleness, to the gender of male, to any of that kind of stuff. And if you look closer, there's just so many great little like imagery nuggets in there. And I love that, you know, there's representation of people of color in this deck. That is something we sorely need in the tarot community. You know, in the symbolism with the flower, and then you have the beetles. I mean, it's just really beautiful and sort of all overlaid onto the Ankh, which is an Egyptian symbol. I think it's just really gorgeous. I think this might be the favorite version I have of the Hierophant that I've seen in any deck anywhere. In general, this deck just has such a lot of like feminine energy, and I love how the aesthetic of the triangles really mirrors this kind of, you know, sort of there is a bit of a rigidness to the Hierophant, or there's a sense of structure, right? And the geometric aesthetic in this card definitely speaks to that energetic nature of the Hierophant. I also really love this. I mean, I love all the cards. Like, I'm looking at each card, and as I go, I'm like, oh, I love this one, and I love this one. They're all great. But the Lovers here, so it's actually the same figure that's mirrored, and I've talked about in other videos how I think, you know, the Lovers really, there's a sense when you're interpreting on a deeper level that it's talking about elements of the self as opposed to two different people. It can certainly mean that as well in a divinatory sense, but there's something really beautiful about considering how am I united, how am I integrated as a whole person, and this particular image definitely portrays that element, and I just love this like iridescent planet globe thing. It's so beautiful. I unsurprisingly love this version of the Hermit. It's really interesting, I think, you know, when we think about the place of the Hermit in the major arcana, you know, it's kind of moving inward, right? And we're starting to understand the nature of reality, how so much of what we think, feel, believe are illusions, and we're kind of starting to perhaps dig into what we like look at as like non-dual states of being. I can kind of see that in the imagery here, where we've got, you know, the black and the white and the dark and the light, and it's looking towards integration. I also find it interesting, a lot of the Hermit cards, I think, have a very like asexual vibe to them, which is okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's interesting. I mean, this card definitely portrays, there's a sensuality to it, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, but there's definitely, you know, something there in the image. In general, what I'm loving about this deck so far is that it really is a fresh take that integrates ancient symbolism, contemporary symbolism, and kind of puts it all together in a really vibrant package. So this death card here, we actually have Anubis, and I love that because I love Anubis. He's definitely a deity that I have some fondness for, and so I think it's really lovely to see him getting some airtime in the tarot decks. And also just the visuals on this card are really different than a traditional tarot deck. You know, traditionally there's kind of, you know, this sort of squareness to it, and this one is very dynamic, and it just looks so different than most tarot cards that I've seen. This Cosmic Union card, which I assume is sort of the equivalent of the World, is really gorgeous. I'll bring it a little closer so that you can see it. Just a nice sense of symmetry and balance in the imagery. I like the colors. Definitely a very beautiful image. Moving on to the minor arcana. Ace of Cups here has a lot of great energy, very interesting, very dynamic. Definitely enjoy it a lot. So across decks in general, the Eight of Cups is probably my favorite card in the suit of cups, and so I always am curious to see what people come up with for the Eight of Cups. And I find this version really interesting. As the human race grows bigger, right, as we look at things like industrialization, capitalism, globalization, right, there's this sense of anonymity, you know, as we kind of move away from our connection to ourselves, our connection to each other, and I feel like there's something in this card that gets at that. And the Ten of Cups here is such a tender portrayal of like maternal love and family. Definitely not something I've seen in a tarot deck before, and it just makes me so happy to see something so natural being portrayed in a really positive way. I absolutely love the Queen of Wands, so resilient, so vibrant looking. I always associate the Queen of Wands with yellow. I think it's the, you know, the sunflower and the Rider-Waite. And then I love the pairing of the yellow and the purple together. So in general, the minor arcana seem, they aren't as necessarily like consistent as some decks are, in terms of some decks will like choose one symbol to have present in each like suit, and they'll kind of, you know, make that like a theme, a motif throughout the deck. She seems to have chosen more kind of to sort of individually seek out what she wants in each of the minor arcana cards, which I definitely can respect and appreciate. I like the visual variety that the minor arcana has. We've got the Seven of Swords, card of secrets and illusion and mystery. And again, I'm just struck by, you know, sort of the visual variety of how, you know, each card is so unique, and there's so many different kind of visual styles that she uses throughout the deck. There's so much there to look at. The Queen of Swords definitely captures that sort of wistful, wise, sad energy that I often find with the Queen of Swords. Overall, I really like the deck. I like how the imagery draws on different traditions, including like the Egyptian tradition. It's very rich, you know, as you look at each card, there's a lot to look at. You know, you look a little closer and you see something new, and I really enjoy that in a tarot deck. I like the size of the cards, I like the feel of the cards, and there's some cool hidden surprises that I think you'll just have to buy the deck to find out some new cards that she's added, and I don't want to spoil the surprise for you. The back of the cards looks like this. I enjoy that image as well. I also really like how much the feminine is centered in the deck. So many decks, you know, traditional decks, really, I think, kind of put masculinity, masculine bodies, especially white bodies, front and center. And there's some shifting to that. You know, it's very, there's a lot of women in the images, and there's, you know, people of color, and I definitely appreciate that. There's some variety. There's cards that have, you know, drawn images. There's cards that have photography, cards that have symbols. You know, she's obviously very multi-talented. Another thing I like about this deck is that it definitely seems to want to pull you into the deeper spiritual meanings of the deck. I think, you know, that's really the whole point of all the stuff that we do, right? Spiritual transformation and growth. You know, and we can look at the tarot for answers to mundane things, but underneath that, ultimately, I think what makes the tarot so special is that it draws us into something deeper. And if you use this deck, it will definitely help make some of those deeper meanings, I think, a bit more accessible. It really centers those in the way the images are constructed. I'm really excited to use this deck. I'll be sure to let you know how it goes. Let me know if you've used this deck, your thoughts on it, if it's something you want to try out. You can purchase the deck directly from Serpent Fire, and I will include a link below if you're interested in that. Hope you enjoyed this new look at the She Wolfe Tarot, and if you like this video, go ahead and subscribe.